Let's give a round of applause to Miss Pamela Ho.
Hello everyone, it's great to see all of you here. So finally I get to see the view from up here. And well, I'd like to thank the DJs, of course, the DJs, I call them the DJs, for inviting me, but also for Halogen as Foundation, as well as SCWO for inviting me here. I really don't know what I'm doing here. I look at all these amazing women and I say, I'm just doing what I love and I'm talking to you guys. And basically, yes, I have taken a year off my work to travel the world and to write a book. But standing up here has always been something even is scary for me. If I was your age and I was 16 and you asked me to be standing up here, I would be terrified. I have always been very, very shy, very, very quiet. And, as I was thinking about what I'm going to do standing on this stage to tell you, I really don't really know what you have in your mind, what sort of information you want to hear from me. And but I realized that if there was one thing that I wanted to share, it would be if I were to meet my 16-year-old self today, what would I say to her? And I guess, I don't know if that's me. That's me at 16. When I was 16 years old, there were 7 things that I knew that I could kind of do, and that was one of them was to write. And I knew that when I was 13 years old. At this point, I had known that I could write for about 3 years, and that was when I was in Sec 1. And my form teacher, my English teacher, Mrs. Greta Ong said, she called me up from her desk, and I was a small 12-year-old, and I went up and she said, "Did you copy your composition from somewhere?" And I said, "No, I didn't copy from anywhere." And then she just waved me off, and I went back to my desk. And that was how it started. The next day, I got my composition back. I got an A. And that was the day I knew that I could write. But it was something that I never thought that I could ever do because I was very shy, right? I was very quiet, and I could never imagine myself taking a microphone and sticking it in front of the Prime Minister and asking him a question in a press conference. It was not a vision I could attain in my head. And so for many years of my life, I went through school, like many of you. I was a teacher. I taught for 3 years at Geylang Methodist Secondary. I went on to do my master's in psychology. I went back to schools to be a school counselor for a couple of years. And then I worked at National Youth Council. I did research. So all this was fine. I got married. I had 2 kids. And that was how my life was. And I wasn't unhappy. That was my idea of what I knew was success, what I knew was happiness. And then in 2006, something happened that totally changed my life. That was when my family that I knew, my marriage and everything, it just crumbled. And everything that I knew at that point to be very stable and true in my life just fell apart. At that point, my children were 5. They're twin boys. And I was working from home. I had opted to stay home to take care of them. And I felt totally alone. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a full-time job. And I guess, he moved out. And I was kind of on my own as a single mother. And that was the first time I felt I was at rock bottom, when you cannot go any lower. I think I could not go any lower. I could not really cry because I had 2 children. But there was a moment where I remember when I just allowed myself to just let go and cry one night. And I sobbed so violently, until I scared myself. I never hear myself cry like that before. And I just said, stop. You really have to move on. And you really got to move on and take care of your children. And that was what I did. The next day, I went to look for a job. And this was, we went much later, recently I read this quote that J.K. Rowling, the creator of the Harry Potter series, wrote. And if you know a bit about her history, she said, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. And that quote really resonated with me because that was, looking back, that was what happened. And that was when, in 2006, when I went back to work. And this time, I had nothing to lose. I could do anything that I could. And I went back to my first love, which was to write. In 2006, I joined magazines. I went from a writer to an assistant editor to a deputy editor of a women's magazine. I started winning journalism awards. Stories started being nominated for news awards. And it was then that I thought, I was on the right path. I was finally going to, move on and be a great writer. And then the magazine that I was part, this was in MediaCorp, it closed. And I felt like, again, there was another downfall, and I didn't know what to do, and they wanted to make me a features editor of Elle magazine. But if you look at me, I'm not a fashion person at all. You'll never see me in any kind of, fashion clothes. I'm always in jeans, and if I could, I'll be in flip-flops. And so I said, no, I wanted to tell stories. I want to tell stories that matter. And that was when I wanted to go to Channel News Asia. And that's what I did, the auditions, and Channel News Asia took me in. But radio heard about me, and radio said, the most interesting thing, I met the big boss in radio. I didn't know she was the big boss. My ex-colleague dragged me there, and she looked at me, she listened to me, and she said this. She said, okay, you're not an airhead, so you can go and, consider hosting a show. And that's exactly what she told me. And in the end, a funny kind of a twist of events, I ended up hosting a show called The Living Room on 938 Live, also on MediaCorp. And that was when I met amazing people on my journeys, on my different conversations with people. And among one of them was this guy called Go Chun. And he and his wife took 2 years to travel the world. And he said something that struck me. It has always been my dream to travel the world and to write a book since I was 13. And I had totally forgotten about that. And he said, if you think that you need a lot of money to do that, or, you need to have a lot of experience, he says, look at my wife and me. We live in a 3-room flat. My father's a hawker. And, but that experience has changed my life. And from there, more and more people came in, and I was at the brink of turning, should I say my age? I was at the brink of turning 40. And at that point in time, this whole thing about my bucket list, the dreams that I always had, I have put on hold for many, many years. And at that point, I was thinking, when am I going to chase my dream? And it was at this point that I decided, okay, it's now or never. So my best friend and I, it's great when you have a best friend who's crazy enough to do crazy things like this with you. And my best friend is an illusionist. She's a magician. And she's crazy, she's nuts. And so what we actually did, but for her and me, our careers were very important. I love journalism. It's something that I have, is part of me, of who I am, telling stories. But when we took that 1 year off, we had no plans. We had no time to plan. We just took a 1 year ticket, one-way ticket to travel. And we figured that, we were just going to move where we wanted to go. And if we liked the place, we'll stay longer. We didn't like the place, we will just off and go. And so we bought a one-way ticket. A lot of plans, kind of screwed up, but we bought our first one-way ticket to Hawaii. And from there, we knew we had to make our way across the United States in 3 months and fly from New York to Paris in June. That was all we knew. So how we were going to get across the US, we didn't know. How we were going to, where we were going to go, we had no idea. But that was another thing that I wanted to take off my bucket list was to do a US road trip, rent a car, and drive across the US. And that's what we got to do. And we also got to take a train, the California Zephyr, across. And we also got to skydive. And the skydive was something that Ning and I always wanted to do, but we never found the time to do it. And on the 4th of April, and this was the most crazy day to jump 10,000 feet in the air, because we had to date every single page of our contract. And it was 4-4, 4-4. And if you're Chinese, you kind of will know the significance of that date. So that was what happened. And we skydived. We did that trip, and we went over. We flew from New York to Paris, and we made Paris a base in the summer. And that's where we explored different parts of Europe. And Ning also went to Le Cordon Bleu, I think where Janice went, and we met Janice many years ago to speak with her as well. And I studied French, which I don't remember at all now, if you ask me anything. And after that, we went down to Africa. And this was a decision that we had many choices. We could go by the Siberian Russian route up north, we could go by the Middle East, or we could go down to Africa, and then up through the Himalayas back to Asia. And that was what we chose, because there was another thing that I wanted to do, was to go to Madagascar. And Madagascar is one of those places, I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But we went down to Casablanca. You know, for those of us who kind of are slightly older, we will know, we always have this image of Casablanca and, you know, Humphrey Bogart and that kind of thing. But Casablanca is nothing like that, let me tell you. When we arrived in Morocco, in Casablanca, we arrived at night. So the next morning, we woke up, and basically, when we went to breakfast, there was no women at all on our travels. We stepped in, all the men looked at us, and we say, is this like a men's club or something? Because there's nobody. And we walked in, and there was one waitress. She waved us in, and we sat down. And that was when we realized that in Morocco, men and women are very different. Their position in the world is very different. And wherever we walked, we were harassed. They were asking us, will you marry me? They will follow us for 15 minutes on the street. And they would just go around us, will you marry me? Will you be my friend? And we just had to imagine ourselves in a bubble. And that was one experience that I felt very different. I never felt that as a woman before, but I did when I was there in Morocco. And another experience that I felt also was in Kashmir, where we were in India, where we stayed with a family in Kashmir. And there was we stayed with a friend of my father's, but at the same time, there were two girls in Kashmir. They were very articulate. They spoke really well. One of them was doing her master's, and we kept telling them, you know, like, come and visit us in Singapore. You know, but at the same time, my dad told us later that, you know, it's quite unlikely. Most of them would just get married, settle down, and have children. The education will probably go down the drain, and she doesn't have a passport. So I guess that opened my eyes to seeing that, you know, there are many women around the world who are young, who are very articulate, who are very intelligent, but maybe because of geography, because of opportunity, they are not able to be fully who they are and, you know, what they were meant to be. And that was very eye-opening for me. And I think coming back from the world travels, and I will leave you all to ask me any questions later, because we went from there to the Himalayas, to Tibet, to Bhutan. We went to Nepal, and then back to Asia through that route. It took us 9 months, and then we wrote a book, and we published it last year. And it's a crazy journey. But when I came back, I guess, you know, one thing that struck me very much was that I came back knowing what I wanted to do, and that was to write, and it was going back to my first love. And after spending a year in Channel News Asia, producing programs, just last month, I took a leap of faith. After 7 years in MediaCorp, I took a leap of faith to leave what was familiar and safe. And I am now going full-time in writing, and a writer who travels. I call myself that. I'm not just a travel writer, I'm a writer who travels. I go around telling stories, and that is where I am. And also, very important to me, as, you know, looking back, if I were to look at that young girl, the 16-year-old girl who, if I were to meet her again, there are several things that I would tell her, being here. One is that life is full of twists and turns, you know. When I started out, I never knew that my life would be anything more than a linear progression. I would graduate, I would get married, have children, I would progress in my job, and my children would grow up. I would retire, and then I would travel the world. Everything is topsy-turvy, and that is the excitement of it. You know, the excitement of that. So one thing, life is full of twists and turns. You will laugh, you will cry very hard. I did, I cried. I don't know if you've done this. I've cried until it hurt physically, until my fingertips actually hurt. I've been really down, but I've also laughed so hard that, you know, my heart is close to bursting. And that's okay. That's okay. It's all part of the journey. You know, just embrace it and just keep moving forward. Secondly, I would tell them success, the way you define it. Well, I've lived all my life in Singapore. The way I define success has always been the Singaporean way, and it's not a bad thing. At the same time, you know, is to let myself know it's okay, because at this point in time, when you're 16 or you're younger, you don't know how success, you need somebody to define it for you at this point, because maybe you haven't discovered it. But the definitions of success will change. And as you travel the world, if you do travel the world and you meet different cultures, you realize that people's definition of success is very different. And in the end, you will just need to define it for yourself. And also next, that I would tell my 16-year-old self is just to trust your instincts. You know, you already know what you want to do. You already know who you want to be. You know, don't let the voices of the world choke that, because what happens is you'll take one big round and you end up back at the starting point. So if you listen to your heart and you listen to yourself and you know that this is my strength, let me explore this. It's like what Janice said. Give me 5 years. Let me explore this. You know, if you do that, if you invest that time in it, then you would see the fruits. The next thing I would tell my 16-year-old self is don't worry so much about the how. Every time, the how question is the one that will kill your dreams. Because if you ask it the first time, if the first question you ask is how, you say, okay, forget it. The how question is very important, but it should never be your first. The first question should be why. Why is this important to me? And if you figure out why it's important to you, somehow the how will happen. You will do whatever it takes. Because as Cassandra said, you know, if there is a will, there is a way. You will find a way, and you will do whatever it takes. And I want to leave this last quote with you. These are my boys in Paris. The last quote is something that has struck me very much, and that is by the late Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs said this in his commencement speech at Stanford University, and I read this. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinion drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. And so I leave you with this message. Be true to yourself, follow your heart, and always live your dreams. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ho.